Bitola is the Slavic name for the town or city known as Monastir by the Turks and Monastir by Sephardim. And during this meeting, we will use Bitola and Monastir interchangeably. I should say that most of the information I am using is from secondary and tertiary sources. I shall give my main sources at the end of the meeting. There is a reason for that. Essentially, most of the records of the city are missing, so a lot of what we have to do is to put everything we have together and try and work out what happened. So here you see it on the map. Today it is on close to the border of the Republic of North Macedonia and Greece. Previously it was part of Yugoslavia. Before then it was part of the Ottoman Empire, and on two occasions it was part of Bulgaria. And it's this quite tempestuous history which to a large degree defines the Jewish history, the Sephardic Jewish history of Monastir. So when did the community arrive? We have at the cemetery, and I'll discuss the provenance of this plaque later. There is a plaque saying that the cemetery was established in 1497, which is just, of course, 5 years after the expulsion from Spain. Can we be sure this is absolutely accurate? No, we can't. It does seem the community was established quite early. It's possible that previously there were Romaniot Jews living in the area. That's to say, Greek-speaking Jews of the Eastern Roman Empire. One source claims that there were also Ashkenazi Jews who had crossed over the border from the Christian lands into the Muslim lands, which were more tolerant of Jews. But again, that is unproven. The original community are speculatively from Aragon, that's to say the region of Spain, more or less surrounding Barcelona, and of course a bit beyond. And this is speculated because the oldest congregation in the city is or was called Cal de Aragon, Community of Aragon, and this is one of the few surviving images of the interior of their synagogue, now destroyed. So how did Jews or Sephardic Jews get there? Again, I'm afraid we have to say we don't know. But here we have a map of the Roman roads, and if you look at the purple line on the left, that's the Via Appia, the Appian Way, which leads down from Rome to Brindisi. And then when you cross the Adriatic into what is now Albania, you can continue on the Via Egnatia, which takes you to Constantinople, today Istanbul, so the former eastern capital of the Roman Empire. And Bitola is on this road. So one possibility, and this is entirely speculative, if Jews came from Aragon and of course southern Italy or parts of southern Italy were under the crown of Aragon, it's possible that they traveled that way. Of course, this is entirely speculative, and they could have come from some other direction, and we don't know why they particularly chose to settle in Bitola. We have a little bit of information from the 16th century. There's an Ottoman census from 1528 reporting 43 Jewish families in the city, and 40 years later that has jumped to 285. Where these extra families come from is not clear. We might speculate later. We also have a report from a Venetian merchant, particularly reporting on the Jewish presence in the city. And again, as we might see later, this connection with Venice might be significant. We know that the Sultan Suleiman Magnificent passed through the city in 1537 and was presumably seen by many of the local Jewish population. This was on his Corfu campaign, which also saw the Ottomans landing in Apulia in the heel of Italy, but obviously they didn't advance any further. So Shlomo Al-Boher, who is one of the experts on the history of the Jews of Monastir, he reports that Portuguese Jews arrived in 1626 and that they were mostly weavers and tailors. I don't have a source for that, and I was certainly prepared to believe that Portuguese Jews, or rather probably New Christians, had arrived in 1626 until Ton came up with this information from the Amsterdam Dota register, the Portuguese dowries in Amsterdam, which seems to be the gift that keeps on giving. And here we see there's a daughter of Isabel Royce in Monastero, who marries David de Campos in 1618. So this is 8 years before we are told that Portuguese Jews arrived. So obviously they were there earlier. Was the enormous increase in population we saw in the 16th century due to Portuguese Jews? Honestly, I have no idea whatsoever. But Ton has also found there's another family. This one is from 1624. We see two daughters of Joseph Maestro in Monastir. And again, we see the same family 2 years later. This time, though, we have two daughters, duas filhas de Joseph Maestro em Monasterio. So two daughters in Monastir and one in Venice. So again, we see this connection. So obviously, Joseph Maestro had connections with both cities. So with respect to the Jews, obviously anyone non-Muslim faced discrimination, or depending on your politics. With the Dhimmi laws, Jews and Christians were protected people or second-class citizens. And we see some quite strange restrictions being placed on Jews in Monastir. For example, on one occasion, they were told that women were not allowed to have writing on their hats. On another occasion, people were told they couldn't wear green, possibly because that's the color of Islam. On another occasion, people were told they couldn't wear brown furry hats. A Jewish source reports that there were forcible conversions to Islam at one point, but also says that those who were forcibly converted then went to Italy, where some then converted back to Judaism and some converted to Christianity, I guess getting hit the hat trick of monotheistic religions. But again, we don't know if that is accurate. It's reported that there was strong support for the false messiah Shabbatai Tzvi, and of course he ended his life not terribly far away, imprisoned on the Albanian coast. And so here is yet another Dota resource found by Ton in the Amsterdam archives. And here we see Angela, an orphan in Monastir, and we see that her father or her parents have died in Venice. So again, this is another family which has connections with both Monastir and Venice, which may or may not be meaningful. And then we have a sort of gap in our knowledge, really until we reach the mid 19th century, and a useful source generally for Jewish genealogy outside Western countries are the various evangelical societies, in this case the International Society for the Evangelization of the Jews, because they are sending representatives out across the world, and these representatives are sending reports on the Jewish population back to their headquarters, who are then sort of publishing this to their supporters, and often this is quite useful. And the figure they give of 5,000 Jews in Monastir in 1850 looks to me to be quite accurate based on what we've seen elsewhere. So in 1848, the English artist Edward Lear visited, but every time he got his sketchbook out, he was surrounded by an angry crowd of Muslims who thought that sketching and drawing images was blasphemous. So he went to see the local Turkish governor, who, as it turned out, was an Oxbridge graduate and was having none of this nonsense. So he sent some soldiers out with Lear, who was able to do his sketching, and later this watercolor is one of his products, and it's quite a bucolic scheme, as scene of the river with the mountains in the background. Elsewhere, though, reports say that that Monastir was one of the dirtiest towns in the Ottoman Empire, famous for its narrow streets. So two different images of the city. So it's quite a small town, and yet by 1853 it had 3 consulates, British, French, and German. And the reason for this is because the Balkans were a powder keg. So essentially, most of it was ruled over by the Ottomans, who were Sunni Muslims. Most of the subject people were Orthodox Christians, some of whom had got independence or partial independence already. So we're talking about the Greeks, the Montenegrins, the Serbs, the Bulgarians, and the Romanians. And they all hated each other, but they hated the Turks more. And this impacted great power politics, because the Habsburgs, the Austro-Hungarians, saw the Balkans as their backyard. The Russians saw themselves as the protectors of Orthodox Christianity. So these two powers were facing off against each other. The British were particularly concerned that the Russians shouldn't get Constantinople, because then they would have access to the Mediterranean, which would threaten the British trade routes. The Germans, actually in 1853, of course, it would be the Prussians, but the Prussians and then later the Germans were trying to assert themselves, and of course the French had their issues at this point with the Germans, the British, and the Russians, and so the great powers, even though it wasn't the most important town, they had consulates all over the region, and of course rightly so, because of course the First World War later is ignited in this region. And this image actually is a photograph from later. It shows the Serbian consulate, which obviously opened much later. By 1872, we have reports of 7 consulates, and even later we have reports of 20 consulates in this single small town. And these consulates are important because the consuls are writing back to their governments, and these records will be surviving in the national archives of the countries. And we've certainly seen in elsewhere in the Ottoman Empire, Jewish people who are protected by these various powers, or members of the community, or dragomans, or their just activities are reported. So I don't think anyone has actually studied the consular archives from the city. And some are quite curious. I mean, Persia, that's to say Iran, I suspect they're there because they want to be sure that the Ottoman army is in Europe rather than on their border. And Spain is really curious. Are they there just as a power? Is it because of their historic relationship with the Jews or some other reason? But Spanish archives, we have found, consular archives, when they have information on individuals, they have a lot of information. Another source, of course, is just travelers' tales, because often they paint an interesting picture of what's going on. I'm afraid this one, if you look at the bottom, is not so reliable. It says the town itself contains a very heterogeneous population of almost 50,000 souls. Jews are especially numerous, mostly Spanish and well off. We know that the Jews in the town most of them were definitely not well off. I suspect this is because the visitor was introduced to the wealthy Jews of the town and just made the assumption, therefore, that they're all rich. So the biggest event impacting the Jewish community of the town before the Second World War was the Great Fire in 1863, and this started in the Jewish quarter in the Cortillo, which was basically the square in the center, and it was the Jewish community that was most impacted. Apparently, only six homes belonging to Jews weren't impacted, and we can see 3,000. That's to say, the majority of the Jewish community were made homeless. The Ottoman government actually did quite a lot to help. The community also wrote to Sir Moses Montefiore in London asking for help, and he took this to the Board of Deputies, who publicized the need, and the community raised, the Anglo-Jewish community raised £2,000, which was quite a lot. Interestingly, the first donation was from a special fund, the Cautivos, the fund of the Spanish and Portuguese Jews, intended to ransom people from Barbary pirates. But I suspect by 1863 they thought that they had no threat from that quarter, so should use the fund alternatively. Interestingly, the British and the French Jews who were helping out were deliberately not helping the Talmud Torah, the religious school, because obviously their interest was in promoting a liberal Western education rather than the Jewish education. So necessarily after the fire, the community was in decline, and this was not helped by the administration of the vilayet of the province being transferred from Bitola to Salonika, because obviously a lot of jobs depended on servicing the government. That period also was one of decline, economic decline in the Ottoman Empire. And as a result of the Russo-Turkish War of 1875, in which the Russians and their Orthodox Christian allies gained territory, the Turks and other Muslims living in that territory were either expelled or left. And many arrived in Bitola, where the local resources were overwhelmed, and then settled in Bitola, where some of them were in competition with the Jewish businesses of the town. So here we see one of a number of ethnographic reports. Everybody, all the European powers are interested to know the demographics and populations between the different communities. I mean, obviously not the Jews, but the major communities, because who's going to come out on top when there's a war? But of the major cities, we can see that Monastir is the smallest in terms of the Jewish population, with a bit over 3,000. Andriopol, today's Erzurumqi, has more than twice that. And Salonika is completely dominant at 40,000, with the point being that if you're a young person living in the region with get up and go, you're probably going to get up and go to Salonika. And we start to see in the late 19th century emigration, or at least migration out of Monastir to other places. The good news for the community is in 1881, Bitola was made the Balkan headquarters, or the European headquarters of the Ottoman armies. So the general staff was based there, the Third Army and the Army of Rumelia. And this, of course, an army needs contractors and people to work. So this brought a bit of prosperity back to the city. And also there was a military, an Ottoman military high school established in the town. And one of the pupils was Mustafa Kemal, later known as Kemal Atatürk, the founder of the modern Turkish Republic. And around this time, we talked a lot about demographics. We have the Greeks, the Turks, and the Bulgarians all claiming that they have a majority, or at least the largest minority in the city, with the Serbs, of course, saying that the Slavs are not Bulgarians, they're Macedonians, and Macedonians are closer to Serbs than Bulgarians. I'm not sure the local people themselves had any say. The Orthodox Church by 1905 estimates Jewish population to be 5,500, which actually seems a little bit on the high side. A railway opened between Salonika and Monastir in 1894, which obviously improved communications and brought economic advantages, and also provided a route for people wishing to leave Monastir to go to other more prosperous places in the Ottoman Empire or beyond. So we mentioned schools before, and particularly the Talmud Torah, which was re-established without the help they wanted. In 1886, a Greek language school was established, particularly popular with the richer members of the community. I suspect this might mean that Greek was the sort of lingua franca of the business community, but don't know. And the Alliance Israélite Universelle opened a school in 1895. And it's kind of interesting because they're competing, it seems, with the Talmud Torah. They've got two rabbis. They've got a Greek teacher, sorry, a Turkish teacher, because they're part of the Ottoman Empire. And they've also got a Greek teacher, perhaps to compete with the other school. And they are reported to have 279 pupils, of which 135 were paying and 144 free, obviously suggesting that most of the population was quite poor. The Talmud Torah around this time had more pupils, but I would suggest that the arrival of the Alliance, if what we've seen in other places is indicative of Monastir, this would be the start of the decline in Ladino. They would call it Spanish, but the Ladino language in Monastir. And in passing, it should be said there was a Monastirli dialect of Ladino, also actually shared by the Sephardim of Kosovo. So maybe that was a satellite community. And perhaps somebody who is a better linguist can suggest whether maybe there was a Portuguese influence that made this dialect different. And so here we have a rather fine image. It's a still from a film that somebody has colorized of the Ottoman Sultan visiting Bitola in 1911. It would almost certainly have been his last visit, if not even his first. And here we have a photograph of the Jewish cemetery. So what we know about this is that Rabbi Shabtai Jayen arrived in Monastir in 1924, and was disturbed by the state of the cemetery. And he made it his business to restore the cemetery, including actually visiting the United States to raise money there. And this work was completed in 1929. And it's Rabbi Jayen who was responsible for putting up the sign saying the community was established in 1497. What information he had, we just don't know. Whether there was written resources or people told him or what, we just don't know. We have no reason to disbelieve him, but we don't know whether it's true or not. On the photograph, you can see lots of gravestones. Unfortunately, during the second Bulgarian occupation in the Second World War, most of these tombstones were removed and used in construction, so they're no longer there on site. So we've already discussed the ethnic tensions in the region, and this exploded in 1912 in the First Balkan War, which was essentially all the local Orthodox Christians against the Ottoman Turks. So it's the Greeks, the Montenegrins, the Serbians, the Bulgarians, and the Romanians. And they were very successful pushing the Turks back more or less to the outskirts of Constantinople. The Serbians occupied Macedonia, including Bitola, which by agreement between them, the Bulgarians and the Greeks, was going to go to Bulgaria. The Serbs had been promised North Albania, but the great powers disallowed the Serbs from invading Albania. They basically protected Albania's integrity, territorial integrity. And so the Serbs, having been denied northern Albania, they just decided that they would hold on to Macedonia, much to the upset of the Bulgarians. And the Second Balkan War in 1913 then turned out to be everybody, including the Turks, against the Bulgarians. And this left the Bulgarians very upset, obviously, and Bitola was then, by this point, definitely part of Serbia. And the image is of Serbian troops standing outside the high school at which Mustafa Kemal had studied, obviously before he became famous. And so the Jews of Bitola, having lived in a multinational empire, suddenly found themselves as a minority in an ethno-state where they didn't share the ethnicity, the religion, and the language. And of course, the Muslims were mostly pushed out by that point, and I think the Greeks went to Greece. So it was increasingly uncomfortable for the Jews living in Bitola. And probably this is a good point to discuss the institutions that the Jewish community had. Again, this information comes from what people wrote down post Holocaust, not from the actual original records. But what we see here is the sort of institutions that you would expect a Jewish community to have. So Ozer Dalim is a mutual aid society. They have a society for clothing the poor, a charity for feeding school kids, an American fund, I suppose equivalent to an Ashkenazi sort of Landmannschaft, where the immigrants abroad are sending money home, and a Hevre Kadisha, a burial society. So essentially a fairly typical Jewish community. And it's reported that there were 9 synagogues, of which 2 were particularly important, the Portuguese and the Aragon. I'm not quite sure why Portugal is listed first. Normally it's Aragon. None of these synagogues, unfortunately, survive to this day. So the First World War, of course, was ignited in the Balkans, which everyone had been nervously watching, obviously with Austria-Hungary, first of all, declaring war on Serbia, and then this whole international alliance system falling like dominoes. So the Austro-Hungarian army was one of the more inept armies ever to take to the field, and they took quite a long time, along with their Bulgarian allies, to defeat Serbia. Or occupy most of it anyway, perhaps it's more accurate. And the Bulgarians got the territory in Macedonia that they thought was should be theirs anyway. This is in 1915. But the very next year, in November 1916, the Entente powers pushed them out. And this is the French, the British, the Greek, and the Serbian armies. And by the end of this, Monastir was in a pretty bad way. The image above shows French soldiers entering Bitola in November 1916 in one of the bits that had more or less survived. But there's a lot of photographs. Most of the city looked like the image below. And so obviously at the end of the war, the Entente powers won, so that Bitola was part of Serbia again, and Serbia expanded into the kingdom of the Serbs, the Croats, and the Slovenes, which then became Yugoslavia. And of course, the Sephardim remain a minority within that. And the interwar period was particularly challenging, and we see a continuation of the emigration from the city that we see from the end of the 19th century. And some of the immigrants didn't go that far. They literally went down the road to Salonika, which was now, since the First Balkan War, Thessaloniki, a Greek city. And the Greeks had tried very hard to Hellenize it, and with population exchanges with Turkey, a lot of Greek refugees settled in what once had been a largely Jewish city, but was now becoming much more of a Greek city. And the Monastiris established a synagogue in 1927, called de los Monastiris, so the community of the people from Monastir. And that's one of the two synagogues which still survives in the city to this day. So between the war, Zionism really took off in the Jewish community, in the religious community actually, as well as the more left-wing community, which is, I think, slightly unusual. Some of the institutions are still with us, so the Women's International Zionist Organization, Hashomer Hatzair, and it's possible that there are records of their monastiri members in the archives of these organizations, which I suspect are probably in Israel. And there are other organizations as well, and I draw your attention to the one at the bottom, Techelet Lavan, which seems to have been a sort of more cultural youth movement, but it's reported to have had 300 members. Now, if we think that the population of the whole Jewish population of the city is about 3,500 members, if we exclude children, then a fairly significant proportion of the Jewish population belong to that one organization. So we see, as I said, a very strong Zionist urge. Probably partly this is because of America closing the doors of perhaps Thessalonica becoming less attractive now it was part of Greece. And whilst access to Israel or to the British Mandate of Palestine was largely closed, it was the most attractive option. And some Monastiri Jews did go there and reportedly mainly settled in the old city of Jerusalem. So obviously there were also sort of cultural societies. Again, the information comes from people remembering post World War II. There are some photographs surviving, but there were sports clubs, music clubs, dance clubs, football clubs, even a mountaineering club, and so there was a lot of social activity in the community that remained. And we've talked quite a lot about emigrants, and Chile was one of the places they went. And emigrations often start with one individual, and then more follow. And in this case, we know who that individual was. He was a tailor called Alberto Levi Arroesti, and first of all, he went to France to try his luck there, but it didn't work out. And he then went on to Argentina, which wasn't successful. And finally, he went to Temuco, it's a city on the halfway up the coast of Chile. And there he prospered. So he sent for his parents, and he wrote to his brother saying this was the new Eden. And probably the letter was handed around synagogue. And so the brother and family followed, and then other families followed afterwards. And to this day, the Monastir community is the heart of the Jewish community in that city. But of course, most Jewish immigrants aimed for the United States. And in 1907, a mutual aid society, Ahovat Shalom de Monastir, was established in New York. And we see by 1915, it's reported to represent a community of about 1,000 people, which is getting close to a third of the community that was still left in Monastir. And they established a synagogue. This photograph is a bit later, when it seems to have been changed into a Spanish-speaking church. But they established a synagogue. I'm not quite sure of the date, but the Sefer Torah was dedicated in 1917, so possibly that's when it was established. I have information on another congregation. I'm not sure if that's the one that preceded or followed this synagogue, but two other Monastir communities were established. Oh, sorry. First of all, I should just mention that the Ladino singer Sarah Arroesti, her ancestors were part of this community, and she's actually has an album called Monastir, and she sings in Ladino very, very beautifully. But apart from New York, two other communities were established in Rochester, in upstate New York, and in Indianapolis. Both of these started in 1906, with in Rochester a few families going, and then a few years later in 1909 establishing a congregation, Or Yisrael Monastir, which still exists, but today anglicized or Americanized as Congregation Light of Israel. And this was reported to have 500 members in 1920. So a significant number compared to the size of the parent community. And also there's a community went to Indianapolis, which seems a bit strange, but the clue is in the photograph, the Kahn Tailoring Company, where Sephardic Jews apparently found it quite easy to find work. So a synagogue was established there, Congregation Sepharad of Monastir, in 1913, a second synagogue in 1919, including people from Salonika. And by 1933, it's reported to have about 75 families in the community. So maybe that's 400-500 people. So we're looking at about 2,000 people of Monastir origin in the United States, more in Chile, and no doubt others had found their way to France, to Britain, and to other places too. So obviously, and unfortunately, we cannot avoid discussing the Shoah. There were reported to be 3,500 people, Jews, living in Monastir at the start of the Second World War. Yugoslavia really tried to remain neutral because they saw what a disaster it would be for themselves to join the war. Mussolini had annexed Albania and had decided that he would invade tiny Greece. But the Greeks not only pushed the Italian army out of Greece, but were then pursuing them into Albania, and the Nazi Germans wanted to support their allies, so were demanding the right to cross Yugoslavia. Historically, the Serbs and the Greeks were allies, and obviously, anyway, the Yugoslav government was deeply mistrustful of the Germans. So they refused. The Germans, again with the Bulgarians, I think, our enemy's enemy is our friend, invaded and occupied Yugoslavia in 1941. And again, the Bulgarians took Macedonia, both Serbian and Greek, which they felt should have belonged to them since 1912. And the Bulgarians, it's a little bit strange. In Bulgaria proper, that's to say Bulgaria within its 1912 borders, they worked very hard to protect Jews, and most of those Jews survived. In the occupied territories, they introduced anti-Semitic regulations, and then at the request of the Germans, the Nazis, on the 11th of March 1943, the Jews of Monastir at 7 o'clock were rounded up, and they were taken to the Monopol tobacco warehouse in Skopje, which is today the capital of North Macedonia, along with members of the Skopje community and some people from Thessaloniki and elsewhere. And the Bulgarians handed them over to the Germans who were in Romania. And the community was transported in 3 transports to the Treblinka death camp between March 22nd and 29th, 1943. And it's reported that within 40 minutes of our arrival, everyone was dead. And that included 99% of the Monastirli Jews. So essentially within a week, a community that had existed for 4.5 centuries was no more. A few people survived thanks to the partisans, and these seem to be people who had past connections. So one of them is the guy pictured, Raphael Moshe Kamhi, who had been part of the Macedonian resistance against the Ottomans. Later was involved in what's described as left-leaning revolutionaries. I'm not sure if that means Stalinist, but because of these connections, he and some others survived the war. He then made Aliyah. He went to live in Israel and died at the ripe old age of 100. So all that survives of the Cal de Portugal synagogue is this pillar, I think maybe 2 pillars, in a children's park in the city. And recently a plaque has been put up. I think that is the Israeli ambassador looking at it. And really that is the end of the community. And let's just quickly look at resources that we might have for research. And I think the problem, again, this is largely speculative. I don't think anyone has properly looked at this from a genealogical perspective. Presumably the records from before 1863 would have been destroyed in the fire. What happened to the records kept from 1864 up to 1941, I know not. I'm assuming they were most likely destroyed, and unless possibly the Bulgarians took them. The two images are of two synagogues in the city. You can see the first one is burnt out, and the second one is not actually the building; it's the pile of rubble in front. So obviously records aren't going to survive in those circumstances. I don't know if anyone has tried to find or to recover the gravestones. I know this has happened in other cities in Eastern Europe, and possibly some of these can be recovered and we can find information there. The sources I'm largely relying on here, other than Ton, of course, are Yaakov Aroesti, Shlomo Al-Boher, Mark Cohen, and a local historian, Zoran Georgiev. These historians necessarily focus on the death of the community, because essentially that's the best documented period. After the war, I think sometime after the war, Yaakov Aroesti, who was in Israel, went to Bitola and apparently had a photographic memory, and he was able to provide the names, addresses, and population and professions of many of the Jewish inhabitants of the town, and was able to identify many people in surviving photographs. And these records survive in the State Archives Bitola division, which is the not very glamorous building picture there. And hopefully in due course we can get these records scanned. Ottoman records, we don't know what really is in the Ottoman State Archives. Some of this material has been copied to the National Archives of North Macedonia and has been studied by Milos Konstantinov. With respect to other things, just a few weeks ago, we had an expert on Ottoman archives speak, and we've had other people speak on various Ottoman resources. I would refer researchers there, and also actually to the Turkey page of my own website, SephardicGenealogy.com. I've more comprehensively listed resources there. So probably there are sources that we haven't come across there. Possibly in the official Gazette, actually possibly of the Ottoman Empire and then of Serbia and the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, we are going to find references to Jews in Bitola. And now what we're doing particularly is we are looking for non-Jewish resources that might exist outside of the city and therefore might have survived the various historical calamities. And then, just other things to tick off. We've got the State Archives of the Republic of North Macedonia, the National Library, which does, I think, have some of the Sharia court records, which is another source. The Yugoslav archives in Belgrade might have something. The Venetian archives, we've had several examples of contacts with Venice, so they're probably worth researching. There were no Jewish newspapers published in Bitola, as far as I know, but obviously there were a number published in Salonika, of which and presumably the Salonika newspapers were read in Monastir and therefore probably reported on Monastirlis. And La Epoca is the name of a newspaper I've seen. And for example, for the fire, newspapers like the Jewish Chronicle in England were reporting, and of course there are other foreign Jewish and secular sources that might have information. As we said before, I don't think anyone has reviewed the various consular archives because it's quite complicated, but I suspect there is information there, and also the immigration records of the United States and Chile and other countries. And I'm sure there are other resources as well. And hopefully, over the next few years, as more and more information is digitized and organized, we will start to uncover more. I should just say, for anyone interested in visiting Bitola, Joseph Benatov, who was a speaker a while back, and is an academic expert on the region. He runs tours. So if anybody wants to visit the Jewish Balkans, I think SephardicBalkans.com is my best recommendation. So really to finish, and obviously this is a very sort of second-hand review of the information. What we have is we have a community that may have been established around 1497, possibly by Jews coming from Aragon. Other people joined later. Some or most of those were Portuguese Jews. It seems that there was some kind of connection with Venice, or at least all of the external reports go to Venice. And I just wonder if even after the Portuguese discoveries and routes to India and whatever, if the old trade routes were still operating, and that's to say there was a trade route stretching from Istanbul to the Albanian coast, and obviously the Adriatic was controlled by the Venetians. So maybe that's going on, or maybe something else. But the fact that Ton is finding references to this community in the Amsterdam archives suggests that the Sephardic diaspora, including places that we might think are backwaters, like Monastir, was more connected than we thought otherwise. And so this community survived. It survived the Ottoman Empire, it survived the Serbs and Yugoslavs, but ultimately was completely destroyed by the Nazis. Reportedly, there's one Jewish person living in Bitola today, and she came from the former Soviet Union. And so this is a small community, Eastern Sephardic community. We perhaps don't discuss those enough. I think there are probably more resources out there that we can find over time, but I think there's nobody really left to remember them. So perhaps that is our responsibility. So many thanks for hearing me today. And if anybody has any suggestions or anything to say, I do not claim to be an expert. I'd be very interested to hear.
If I may, I raise my hand.
By all means.
Yeah, I'm Alumit Ishai. My grandmother immigrated from Skopje in 1931. She and her cousin, she was only 18, she and her cousin left Skopje, and via Saloniki, my grandmother took a boat to Palestine and her cousin took a boat to New York. They were basically the only one to survive from the family, because the rest were sent to Treblinka. Just want to mention, you didn't say that in your talk, that the three Jewish communities, Bitola, Monastir, and Skopje, were highly connected. And you mentioned only 3,000 Jews that were sent to Treblinka, but this is incorrect. There were 7,144 Jews that were sent there, and only very few survived. The reason I raised my hand is that in Israel, in Jerusalem, there is a very small community of the descendants of the Macedonian Jews who survived. They published a booklet about the history of the community, and they also have a few projects. So according to their booklet, the Jews in Macedonia were more ancient than the 15th century. These were small communities of Ashkenazi Jews, And then after the Jews were exiled from Spain, they settled among them. And of course, they married and they have more, and the community grew as more exiles were joining them. This small community is also collecting money to restore the cemeteries in these 3 cities that I've mentioned. It turned out that the headstones are very interesting because they tell a life story of all the deceased. And from restoring these headstones, you can learn a lot about these Jews. They had many professions. Some of them were merchants that traveled to Israel, to the US and other places. And just by reading the headstones, you learn a lot about the community. So this is an ongoing project. And
Do you know who's,
lastly,
sorry, just before you continue, when I said 3,500, of course I was talking about the Jews from Monastir, not from the other.
right, no, but I'm just saying that
Yeah, no, you're right. It's important to
the
say.
3
Yeah.
communities were highly connected, and none of them, unfortunately, were spared. Also this small community in Jerusalem took a very big project on themselves to transcribe the names and basically do like family trees of all the Jews that were in these 3 cities. I was astonished to learn that my family name, which was my grandmother's family name, was actually pronounced Ishach and not Ishai. And they have a lot of information that you may find useful.
Do you can you share the name of the group that is doing this?
Unfortunately, you can connect them via a website in Hebrew. So I don't know if you read and speak Hebrew. Okay, so I will send this in a chat, and I can also send you the personal contact information of the organizers.
If you can do that, and we can just we'll put it in our next newsletter, so our supporters can
Sure.
see.
Thank you for the edifying lecture.
Well, it's by no means expert, but so we had a question from Ellen. She's asking how she can contact the group. Well, hopefully we can get that. Yeah, I think you're right. Probably I should have discussed Skopje and others. I mean, there seems to have been a small community in Pristina in Kosovo. And we know also that there were people living on the Albanian coast. I think there's just only so much. Jean mentions you mentioned Skopje, Monastir, and Salonika. What about Kastoria? Am I not right in thinking that Kastoria was a Romaniot community? Perhaps somebody can correct me on that. Anyway, Ton.
Interestingly, in the archives of Dotar, there's also someone from Skopje mentioned in the same time period, more or less. So from the Amsterdam point of view, there were connections there. Bernard has his hand up. Bernard?
Hi. Yeah, thank you, David. That was very interesting. And as always, a whole bunch of new information to take on board. I've got a couple of specific questions and a request. The questions start with, you showed a map right at the beginning with the movement that was running from west to east. And I wondered whether that was originally a Crusader route, which from about the 11th century, the Crusader routes obviously became major trade routes. And you talked about the consulates of the various European powers in Monastir, but there were consulates in a lot of places along the routes, but there were also hostels. So you would get an English hostel, a French hostel, and a Dutch hostel, and you would then also get small communities that formed around them. And I wondered whether, if any of those existed, whether or not they have records that might be useful. And also, you didn't mention specifically, although maybe it was covered by the archives that you did mention, but municipal records, which would list things like property ownership and who ran which shops and so on. Would that be included in that? And then I have a request. You showed a picture in which there was a mention about support for Shabbatai Tzvi. And we get these kind of tantalizing mentions of Shabbatai Tzvi and the splits in the community and those who had a messianic belief and those who didn't and what happened afterwards. I would love to have somebody come and give us a session on Shabbatai Tzvi so that we actually know rather better what it is that people were supporting or opposed to, what the battles were about. So can I put that in as a request? And just a last thing, which is neither a request nor a question, but the Ladino group that does sessions on Sunday afternoons under the name of Encontros del Had. They did a session about 3 weeks ago, which unfortunately I couldn't go to because it clashed. But I raise it because you showed a picture of some of the activities of the Jewish community, including sports. And they did one on the Olympic athletes of Turkey, the majority of whom for the first Olympic Games were Jewish and I think largely Sephardic. And I think it might be interesting at some point in the future to have a session on those. But anyway, thank you, and I've thrown in my questions.
Okay, well, that was quite a lot. The map I showed was of the Roman roads,
Okay.
which, even as we know in Britain, there's still, in London, we've still got, in the city, we still have the Roman street plan. So my speculation, I don't know, is that those were just the trade routes that continued. With respect to hostels and local archives, I mean, possibly. I mean, we don't know what damage was done to the municipal archives in Bitola in the fire and the two wars. But obviously, as a group, we're more interested in the early modern period, which of course is where we just got a few dots that I've been perhaps rather ineptly trying to join together. So yeah, I think that's all interesting. What interests me the most is what they were actually doing there. Whether it was some, not Silk Road, but some sort of east-west trade route that was still sort of going on before Napoleon did for Venice, or something else. And this information that Ton is finding in the Amsterdam archives, I mean, my as a sort of London Sephardic, Western Sephardic Jew, I just grew up thinking, well, we're here and they're over there, and the fact that these networks existed in the 16th century even is unbelievably impressive to me. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot that we still have to discover.
Thank you, Bernard. Thank you, David. I believe that Steve Law wanted to speak. Can you unmute yourself?
I may have, Dr. Isha may have said this. I was jotting down something I might have missed, but I was wondering if there is more information about some dispute about the details of the grave, a couple hundred gravestones I heard at the cemetery that they reclaimed the information on the gravestone, but it's not being released to the public yet. This comes from Joe Yaucha, who self-published a book, and he did a exploration and a lot of study, and went and talked to a lot of people there. And so there was apparently a political debate, maybe between outside Jews and local people from the community, I think in Skopje or maybe Monastir. I don't know if any of you had any information about that.
I'm a neuroscientist. The human brain is my expertise. I'm not expert on that, but there is an expert in Israel. She belongs to this community of the descendants of Macedonia. She is, I believe, a professor at Bar Ilan University. Her name is Rachel, and I'm going to put her contact information in the chat. She is been traveling frequently to Macedonia, to the three cities, and she has personal connections with the Israeli ambassador to Macedonia. It's now, I believe, North Macedonia. And together they are doing many projects to restore whatever is possible. So she may have some information, and I'm happy to put her contact information here for you.
Thank you. And maybe Steve can put the title of the book in chat. That will be nice. Ellen Coit, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you for this presentation on Monastir. I'm very interested in this topic, particularly a Cohen and Meshulam family that went to Palestine in the 1880s and 90s. So I heard what you were saying about possible missing records in Bulgaria, have not looked into that. But my question is really about the slide, and maybe you could show it again. It went pretty quickly on the 9 synagogues. I'm curious about sort of the distinctions amongst congregations. You talked quite a bit about school options for Jewish families, but not a lot about the different denominations or variations within the 9 synagogues. And I was wondering if anyone had anything to comment about how the Jewish community might have been divided that way.
I mean, certainly I wouldn't claim to be an expert. What we certainly see in other communities and countries is there's a community, and then various wealthy families set up their own. This is secondhand information from, oh gosh, off the top of my head, but it's one of the sources I reference, so you'll be able to find in his book. When we have, like, number 9, special room for the residents of the courtyards, I think this is the cortillo, so this is just the sort of central area of the town. So it looks like, for example, that Shlomo Levi has his own synagogue, and others too. But I'm afraid there's nothing I can particularly add to that.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yes.
Can I ask one more? This fellow, Joe Yocha, found some really fascinating information about his family member that studied at the Allianz School. And I wonder if there's where they talked about the pupils and what they're doing in the school. I wonder if there's been any effort to make those digitized and translated from the original French.
We had a speaker a couple of years ago on the Allianz, and what he was saying is that most Allianz surviving records, they have information on the teachers, but not the pupils. I mean, we could be lucky in this particular case, but generally speaking, they don't list the pupils. In some cases, of course, there are also books reporting donors in particular locations, and so that. I mean, hopefully the work being done in Israel can, you know, be a framework on which other things can be built.
I see no more questions. There's one more question. Oh yeah, that's the donation question. That's now answered by David.
There are 2 questions by Ryan in the chat.
Oh,
Yes, Ryan asked, was there something that happened in 1906 specifically that caused a bunch of monasteries to move out, or was it a coincidence?
That I've wondered about. I don't know. When there was mass Jewish immigration to Britain, the Board of Deputies of British Jews was very concerned that everybody shouldn't settle in a couple of places, essentially forming, as they saw it, ghettos, which would, undermine the reputation or whatever of the Jewish community. I don't know whether in New York there was the same thing going on or something else, because we're not talking about very large numbers of people. Maybe that's a question for an American researcher, and maybe there'll be something in the American Jewish press of the time.
I understood the question differently. He was
Okay.
asking what may have happened in Monastir that would have caused such a large exodus around 1906.
Oh, fine. I mean, specifically, I can't say, because then the 1906 that I was referencing was people moving from New York to Rochester and Indianapolis. I think there were, you know, for ordinary reasons of people migrating in the late Ottoman period, and then probably more once the Serbians took over, but precisely I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
And he had one other question. Also, do we know anything about the families that donated to the monastery synagogue in Salonika, aside from just their surnames? Is anything known about their families?
Not by me, but hopefully the Israeli researchers will have some more information.
Well, there was a big fire in Saloniki in 1914, I believe, and a lot of the synagogues and their archives went up in smoke. So that would be a miracle if something survived, I'm afraid. But maybe newspapers will have such lists. I think there are no more questions, David.
Okay.
Bruce Gahan.
Sorry for jumping in. I'm just wondering, David, is there a way to use how money was moved through these communities to track the movement of the people? You know, we know about pintas, but is there something? Is there a data source? I guess I'm asking in the way the money moved to help these people either stay or leave or come.
Well, I think Ton has done some research on money. I mean, earlier period, money moving from Amsterdam to Terra Santa. If you're talking about money from the United States to Bitola, I don't know. I mean, presumably it's whatever systems existed at the time. Ton, do you have any thoughts?
Well, the things that I researched are very specific, and they must be there for other communities, but they are all related to Israel. What I know from Amsterdam is that once in a while a synagogue went up a smoke, say in Eastern Europe, or there was an earthquake in Izmir or in Israel, then emissaries were sent and they did the tour through Western Europe, including Amsterdam. And in the Amsterdam archives, you find references to these things happening and to the money that was given to those communities by Amsterdam, also in London. I know Livorno also had funds. Bordeaux gave money. So in those, in the archives of those communities, you might find references to things happening in Izmir or Skopje or Bitola or Eastern Europe or elsewhere. So, but that's a lot of work. Okay. I think we can wrap it up now. Thank you all for joining us. I hope to see you all in 2 weeks' time. We thank our patrons for their continuing support, and we hope that they will keep supporting us in the future. And in 2 weeks' time, we will have Q&A in the context of the European Jewish Heritage Days. So we hope to see you there. Thank you and good night.